Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scott McKay.
Hey there once again, and welcome to yet another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. My name is Scott McKay, at Scott McKay on Twitter, Real Scott McKay on Instagram, Scott McKay on YouTube. The web address is mountaintoppodcast.com. And as always, please come and join us on the Mountaintop Summit Facebook group, where you'll find a big group of engaged, intelligent, high-character guys to hash out those things that are going to make us better men. With me today is a new friend of mine. I'm really excited about this show and the topic and the subject matter we're going to discuss, because it's something that I'm involved with personally in a big way, yet you guys probably don't know that. But that's probably just as well, because we're talking about side hustles. And you'll discover all about what a side hustle actually is and how powerful they can be as an addition to your life. And best of all, a little bit on how to start pulling a side hustle for yourself. But without anything further, I want to introduce you to Nick Loper from Side Hustle Nation. He's got a book called The Side Hustle on Amazon, and he also hosts a podcast of his very own called The Side Hustle Show. Nick, welcome, man.
You bet, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, it's my pleasure. I'm really excited about this topic because, first of all, we've never covered it on this show. Second of all, because it's one of those things that not only makes us more excited to be alive as men, as we've been talking about quite a bit lately, but it's something that women look at and say, well, here's a guy who's got his act together, who's got some ambition and some direction in life, and yet you don't have to quit your quote-unquote day job to do a side hustle by definition, right?
That's right. Making extra money never goes out of style. So I'm excited to dive into it.
Oh, yeah, man. Right? Who's going to scoff at that? So what is a side hustle? Let's just throw that on the table first, Nick.
Broadly defined, a side hustle is anything you're doing to make extra money outside of your day job. But, in generations past, maybe it's called moonlighting. But today, side hustle has a more entrepreneurial connotation rather than just delivering pizzas or bartending on the weekends, right? There's this connotation that this is something that could eventually scale. Maybe it could be more time leveraged. Maybe it could be a vehicle that replaces your day job income.
Yeah, you said something that's very thought-provoking. Nobody uses the word moonlighting in the online business world, do they? It's like they had to have their own little vernacular. Side hustle is all over the place, right, as a term, because, hey, you know what? If you're leveraging something that's an online business, something that, you can kind of create an air of even internet anonymity, even as you're still working your quote unquote day job, it kind of needed its own term. Because, while you were initially answering the question I asked, I was thinking of, a woman who worked 4 jobs and waited tables and cleaned floors all night. That is not a side hustle. That's moonlighting. That's having 4 or 5 jobs just to survive. And, not to besmirch that. I mean, people who work hard for a living and put bread on the table for their kids, that gets ultimate respect. It's just, right. This is a little different. This has the connotation that I am doing something different with my talents that isn't necessarily going to float my whole household yet. But, it helps. And it's something I'm a little bit more passionate about maybe than what I'm doing all day long, right?
Right. The tagline for the show for a long time was, because your 9 to 5 may make you a living, but your 5 to 9 makes you alive, right? This is something that you care about, that you're motivated to work on. And that is the driving, motivation behind making it happen, because it's not easy to do. And you're competing against Netflix and HBO and ESPN. Like, there's all this other stuff you could be doing with your time. Instead, you're trying to build a business. Yeah, right. On one hand, it's easier than ever to build a side hustle because you have the internet in front of you. But then again, there are more distractions than ever from actually doing it because there's an internet in front of you. Right. Kind of a weird paradox, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. Never more opportunity. But at the same time, it's like it almost becomes the paradox of choice. Like, well, which way do I go down? And that's like, I'm just as guilty as the next guy is contributing to that with, 300 something episodes. And I find myself, if I hang up the call being like, well, crap, I should go do that. Like, that's the mark of a good episode for me. And there's been hundreds. And so it's like, I get people all the time are like, I don't have any ideas. And then the other person is like, I have too many ideas. How do I pick?
Well, we as men, it's interesting how we're motivated by visuals. And of course, that's often talked about in terms of attractive women, of course. But it's also true when we see a movie about someone who's really a badass, we leave that movie wanting to be a badass. You know what I mean? Wanting to go out and do that. So I completely hear what you're saying. You also said something that I love. I wish I would have thought of it first, actually. You know, your 9 to 5 may make you a living, but your 5 to 9 makes you feel alive. And that idea of feeling alive is something, you know, Nick, I don't think a lot of guys even know what we mean by that anymore, because they've been so accustomed to growing up in suburbia, then getting a job at the insurance office, coming home, watching someone else live their life on TV and kind of living vicariously through it. We talk about that constantly around here, by the way. And they really just don't ever see anything wrong with that level of comfort. And to go out and say, you know, I'm going to take the bull by the horns here. I'm going to decide, first of all, right? Even be cognizant that that's a thought process going on in my brain, that there's something else I'd like to be doing. And it's not an either or situation. It could very well be a both and situation. If I would just shock myself out of my status quo, be willing to break the ennui of comfort that perhaps I don't even realize is so boring, and go out and breathe some oxygen and get started doing something different. How do guys even get to a point where they realize that shock to the system needs to take place, let alone taking the first step?
Yeah, it's just like, how do you know there's a problem? It's like, well, you know, if you wake up and you're kind of just going through the motions, you do that long enough, you're like, where did, you know, for me, it's like, what happened to this week? What happened to this month? Like, crap, it's almost March already. Like, what happened? When I find myself saying that consistently, it's like, okay, time out, reflection time. What did I get done? A friend put it this way, like, did I do work that mattered today? Did I matter? And if you can frame yourself, you can even force yourself, you know, set a nightly calendar reminder to ask yourself, like, what did I actually accomplish today? Like, am I getting myself any closer to my goals, or am I just going through the motions?
You know, when you're talking about this idea of do I matter, I suspect, and I want to hear your take on this, a lot of guys fall into a trap of thinking that mattering, having a purpose, has to be something grandiose or don't even show up. In other words, if I'm not Gandhi or Jonas Salk, then, you know, why not just let my days pass doing what I'm doing, because my life isn't going to matter in the end anyway. It's kind of like a Wikipedia complex. You know, if I'm not world famous and incredibly rich because I'm so talented and well known for this, then like, why bother? Yet there are 7.5 billion of us on this planet. And if every one of us did one thing we were passionate about, it would all matter. Everything matters in the grand context. And even if we just did our 7.5 billionth worth of heavy lifting in terms of being the guy we were meant to be on this planet, sometimes I wonder how guys will figure out in their own minds, hey, you know, it will matter as long as I'm making the world a better place in some way and I'm doing that which I'm passionate about and uniquely called or gifted to do, right?
Yeah, there's the inherent internal motivation of like doing the work that matters to you, that you care about, that is exciting to you. I mean, like I started the podcast with a $50 mic in my living room. Life-changing decision, right? And I imagine your story is similar. You're talking about your podcast setup before we hit the record button.
Well, I thought I was a cheapskate Scotsman because I had a $100 mic.
There you go.
You just one-upped me.
It's, upgraded years later. I don't know if I hear any bit of a difference, but it's like, that was the internal motivation. This is something that I want to do. It's an experiment. I don't know if it's going to work, but I'm going to put it out there, see what happens, see if it's something that I enjoy doing. Then there's the external motivation of, you know, profit, fame, exposure, all that type of stuff.
Well, profit, fame, exposure. How much can a guy reasonably expect? I mean, if a guy's saying to himself, well, you know, I want all those things, but I'm never going to be a billionaire from this. I'm never going to be world famous. So why bother? How do we get guys unstuck from that mindset and have them take that first step? You know, like celebrating the small successes, the small points of light that tell you, hey, you know what? If I put a little bit more effort into this, if I put my nose to the grindstone just a little bit more, this is going to work. How do you get guys off a top dead center and get them to take that first step?
Oh my gosh, go read the Tim Ferriss article on like the cost of fame. And there's a quote in there from Bill Murray. He's like, everybody who I meet says they want to be rich and famous. And he's like, why don't you try rich first and see if that, solves all your problems? It's like, it was a really interesting look into the stalkers and some of just the crazy, death threats and stuff that Tim had received as a result of being a really public persona. So I have very little desire to reach the level of notoriety or fame that he has when I can make a perfectly good living and support my family and plan for retirement with the audience that I have, with the business that I have. So first of all, like, is that really what you want? Are you prepared for the good, bad, and ugly that comes with it? But as far as the first steps to, kind of get off the sidelines and into the game, I've walked people through a handful of different frameworks to come up with business ideas. And the first is what I call the intersection method. And this is where you have 3 columns on a sheet of paper, with column 1 being your list of skills, like anything that you've gotten paid to do in the past. Like, you can just look at your resume, like somebody paid you to do this job, whether or not you thought it was worthwhile or not, it was a skill somebody thought was worth paying for. Any skills you've learned outside of work, which, no one, never had a job in podcasting or something, but it's something that, it's something I've learned on my own time, right? I'd put that in that column as well. Column 2 is your interests, hobbies, what you like to do outside of work, what lights you up, how do you like to spend your free time, that type of stuff. And then column 3 is somewhat optional, but a good place to start would be your network or your network's network. Like, who do you know and who did they know, right? Like, and the point of that column is you're trying to draw intersections between items on those 3 lists and say, if I'm into podcasting and I am super into reading self-development books, and oh, by the way, I happen to know an organizer of a podcast conference or something. Like, okay, that's a natural intersection. Maybe there's a service that I could provide to an audience of podcast producers or something like that. So that's kind of one framework to start with.
Well, what sprang to mind immediately while you were talking, Nick, is how to leverage an audience you already have. Like, guys are saying, hey, you know what? I'd really like to start doing sculptures, but I don't know who I'd sell them to because I don't know anybody who's interested in sculpting. Meanwhile, this guy is like the 3rd best bowler in his entire state, and he's on a Facebook group full of 28,000 bowlers. He already knows that many people in that sport. He could immediately leverage the bowling niche, if you want to call it that, right?
Sure.
And do a side hustle related to something that he's really passionate about and likes doing. Even in a small way, he'd already have a built-in audience. And that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. A couple of the things I'm personally doing as side hustles are related to what I like doing other than helping guys get better in life and being better with women. And I have large audiences of people who like to do what I do that I'm already leveraging, and it's working out pretty well. It seems to me like that's a no-brainer, but guys don't think out of the box or even out of the cubicle, really, if you want to get literal, and see what's out there that they could be leveraging right now. Not just your own talents, not just your own passions, but who is an audience you're already a part of? Where is there a group? Where is there a tribe that you can already draw into who would immediately have a built-in interest for what you're doing, right?
Yeah, and this audience piece is super important because everybody's like, well, I don't have an audience, or I need an audience to make money. And it's like, well, if you peel it back, you probably already do. I mean, you may read case studies of internet marketers and like, the money is in the list. You may not have, a multi tens of thousands of people on an email list, but my guess is you have hundreds of people in your virtual Rolodex who at least care something about what you're working on. And I don't know what the latest stat is. Like, the average person has 245 Facebook friends or something. Like, it's 245 people who at some point in their lives connected with you. And I wouldn't go out and like blast message them or something, but it might be worthwhile to reach out when you have a new project and say, hey, what's been up, man? Haven't talked in a while. What are you working on? What are you excited about these days? Right? Because it's only human nature for the reciprocity to spring in and them to be like, well, here's what I've got going on. Not too much. What about you? Well, since you asked, I actually started this thing, but it opens the door. And it's, again, not necessarily trying to sell to your network, like network marketing style, multi-level marketing style, but to say, like, who do they know who might be interested in this thing? And if it's a fit for them, fantastic. But again, just trying to foot in the door, spread the word a little bit, and hopefully it can spider out from there.
Yeah, and I'm thinking in terms of Facebook groups too, where someone else has done the heavy lifting of building that audience. and you're a part of it. And a simple communication with the moderator of that group may clear the way for you to tell all those thousands of people about what you're doing, or even just by contributing to that group as a valuable member.
Yeah.
Once you've actually earned the right to be heard, so to speak, as someone mentioned on a previous show. And I love that phrase because it's kind of tied to deserving what you want, which is, of course, our URL around here. It's so important. Then people will listen to you. People will see you as an authority, and they will want to know how to do what you're doing. And another thing I want to add to that conversation is if you're involved with something that's kind of niche-y, and there's a web portal that's the place to be for that particular niche, and you're targeting that group of people, if you're like me, here's the way I've always been, okay? Go and talk to whoever runs that website about what it takes to advertise on there. Because let me tell you something. You are not spitting into the wind if you advertise on the main portal for that niche of people, right? That is the most highly targeted group of mofos on planet Earth. And if you're like me, see, you'll look at something and go, oh, that's too complicated or that's too expensive, and you'll pass it off and you won't do anything with it because of an arrogant assumption. And that's just what it is. Man, over the last 20 years of my life, I have tried to beat that impulse that goes on in my life over the head with a shovel until it stops twitching because it's just a bad habit. I actually put what I'm talking about into practice very recently. And I found out, I laughed. I did a happy dance and laughed after I got off the phone. I found out I can be on the front page of their entire portal for a whole month for $150 US. $150. And that puts me in front of every single person I know who could theoretically buy this product. Every single person who clicks onto that page is part of my target market. But because I'm only reaching a certain number of thousands of people, the advertising only costs that much. Now, if I'm getting on the front page of some major Alexa 100 site and putting the same ad up there, ultimately, I may only reach the same exact number of people who are actually interested in what I'm doing, even if I put retargeted pixels up there. In other words, if you're a guy who keeps seeing ads for what you just clicked on every time you click elsewhere, that's called retargeting. Yeah, they're doing that to you. And even if I did that, the cost of that would far exceed just going to the place where every single person is logging onto that site going, hey, I'm here for the same exact reason. That's part of what the side hustle is. It just makes perfect sense. And those are ways to think out of the box a little bit in terms of how do I find this audience, even when, hey, they've always told me I need to have a big podcast or some other organically generated tribe of people like a mailing list or a big Twitter following or something. Twitter is a waste nowadays. Nobody's doing anything in terms of business development off of Twitter because everybody just arguing about politics. But you see where I'm flowing with this. And I'm sure, in your mind, you have other things you could contribute to that point, right?
Well, it's really marketing 101, right? Getting in front of your target people where they're already hanging out, where they're already doing business. We've seen this in the form of strategic partnerships like, hey, I offer SEO services for a certain industry. I'm going to strike up strategic conversations with web designers who happen to have those ideal clients on their client roster. Hey, would it make sense to pay a referral fee to refer me new business? Absolutely. One of my favorite shows recently on the podcast was a woman who started a pet waste removal business. And so she rolled up to local veterinarian offices with a box of donuts and a pile of business cards. Would you mind if I leave both? Who are your target customers already doing business with? She talked about hanging up a giant hot pink banner at the local dog park. Cost her $200 or something for the year, right? Getting in front of your target customers where they're already hanging out.
I read something from Dean Jackson recently. And if you guys don't know who Dean Jackson is, he's basically one of the OG godfathers of direct response marketing, like internet marketing. And he was talking about how when people start a business, they try to cast a wide net. And of course, the old saying immediately springs to mind, when you try to please everybody, you please nobody. And he was talking about his friend Joe Polish and how when he started a carpet cleaning business, he didn't say, hey, y'all, we'll just clean your carpets for as cheap as possible and then dive right into the commodity-driven market for how cheap you can go to clean carpets. He specifically targeted people who needed to clean their carpets for a specific reason. And then those people who saw that he was the specialist at that not only immediately hired him because he stood out from the crowd, but they paid more for the privilege of having the guy who was the specialist. And I thought that was really, really smart. Instead of being a general practitioner like a doctor might be, you want to be a specialist in a certain regard. And even though it hurts at the front end and seems almost counterintuitive that you'd be carving out a niche within a niche, next thing you know, you have all of those people interested in what you're doing. And it's kind of like online dating nowadays. If you're trying to appeal to every single woman out there who's remotely attractive, she's getting hit on by 200 different guys on Tinder every day. She doesn't know how to sort them out. But if you're going after the women who are on your team, who are like you, who do the same things you do, then there may be 5 or 6 of them in the entire metro area you live in, but you'll be interesting to all of them, and you'll like those women better anyway. For our part here at XMI Communications, even way back in the pickup artist era where guys were really responding to the get laid quick marketing, we built our business for men who wanted to find a great woman and do it from a position of character, not being skeezy about it. And that weeded out a whole lot of guys. As a matter of fact, some of my friends whose names you guys would recognize from the pickup artist era told me to my face that I was being foolish and that I was a bad business guy. Well, they're all gone and we're still here. So there's something to this for sure. I'm also reminded of something else that comes from one of the great copywriters of all time, Gary Halbert, where he offered a group of people he was speaking to every advantage over him in the world except one. He had people call out answers from the crowd, and they were saying, well, lower price, better product, more of a marketing budget. He was like, nope, nope, and nope. And they were like, well, what is it? He's like, well, if I have a crowd who's starving for what I'm providing, if they're hungrier for what I'm doing than your crowd is, then I will win every time. So the question is there a starving crowd who wants what you've got? Then even if you start off on a small scale, people are going to eat up as much as you can cook up, right?
Yeah.
So what do you got, Nick, on this whole starving crowd idea? I'm sure you agree with it. It's pretty much a sound principle. Where do these guys go using existing platforms to find a starving crowd?
Yeah, I like it a lot. I call it the buy buttons theory. And the theory is if you want to make money, go where the cash is already flowing. These being platforms like eBay, like Amazon, like udemy.com, UDEMY for online courses, like Fiverr for freelancing, right? It's like online dating, like going to these online dating platforms, go where the cash is already flowing in certain cases.
The cash is certainly flowing on some of the online dating platforms, especially like the sugar baby sites. Don't get me started on that one.
We had,
go ahead, I'm sorry.
A woman on the show who was teaching guided meditation experiences, and her starving crowd was on Airbnb. She set this up as an Airbnb experience in Sedona, Arizona, I want to say. And because Airbnb knows who's coming to that town, when they're coming to that town, they were putting her experience as like a suggestion. So very little marketing on her front outside of taking some pictures, creating the listing. So that was how she got in front of her starving crowd. There's a ton of different examples, even like local speaking engagements, right? How can I get in front of my target audience? Maybe you have a different product ladder. Like I can sell my book. I could get paid to do the speaking. I could get paid to do one-on-one consulting with private groups afterwards. Tons of different ways to go about it.
Well, Nick, you know what? A lot of guys are hearing about that woman and her genius B&B strategy, and they're thinking, I'm just not that creative. I've never had an original thought in my entire life, and I'll be the first to admit it. How do these guys get over that obstacle and get to the point where they're like, hey, you know what? I do have an idea. Here is something I could do. What's the first step in that regard? Because it seems to me that's pretty much the hurdle for a lot of guys out there.
It really is. And it was for me for a lot of years too. I think the biggest thing to get over is the idea that your business idea needs to be something so innovative, so, curve jumping, never before seen before, to make it work. When in reality, if somebody else has paved the path, if somebody else has done something similar, they've done the validation. They've removed a lot of the risk from the equation for you. A friend gave the example of like, well, how many dry cleaners are in your town, right? It's like they all have pretty much the same business model, but they're all pretty profitable because there's they've been around for decades, One of my favorite examples on somebody who started with a service business was just a hobbyist, I guess, motorcycle guy, right? It was ad on Craigslist. I'll fix your bike. Mechanical engineer by day, nights and weekends, turning wrenches in his garage, fixing bikes, hours for dollars, straight up side hustle, right? His stroke of genius was...
Was it a 2-stroke of genius or a 4-stroke of genius?
Yeah, how many cc's are we talking about? He turned on the camera, started filming himself doing the repairs, which made the work slower. And it was kind of a speculative move, but it gave him content for YouTube, started to build a YouTube presence, started to sell like full engine rebuild videos for different bikes that he was working on. And that has led to, over the years, his passive income piece of the pie or time leveraged piece of the pie is now like 97% of this thing. And whereas before, he started out as 100% active versus like, I'm just doing the motorcycle repairs, but now he makes income from YouTube, makes income from selling the videos. Insurance companies have like discovered his channel, like, hey, would you do some sponsored content for us? Like, yeah, sure. It's just one of my favorite examples of like carving out a tiny piece of your day, tiny piece of your week to, building this passive income piece of the pie. Because if you don't, like Warren Buffett says, if you don't figure it out, you're going to work until you die.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a friend of mine whose name is Lucas Rui, and he started a business called Hero Soap Company. And he's actually a friend of this show and a sponsor to this show. And what he's done is he's made the kind of soap that doesn't harm you as a man. It doesn't get into the estrogen receptors and feminize you. There are no parabens, natural ingredients only. It smells great and isn't that expensive. And he's managed to not only build a side hustle out of that, but it's become a pretty big deal. And he's selling nationwide. And like I said, he's sponsoring this show. If you guys want to go check out mountaintoppodcast.com/hero, you'll find out about Lucas's soap. He's got something that's called a grit scrub that will spiff up your hands and make it easier for women to let them run all over their hot, sexy bodies, things like that, things that could help you out as a man. And a part of every sale goes to benefit U.S. veterans, which is also pretty cool. And that's mountaintoppodcast.com/hero. And you can learn more about what Lucas is doing. It's pretty cool. And again, it started out as a side hustle. I'll tell you, getting back to this idea of guys having a hard time figuring out where to even go with an idea for a side hustle, here's what I would suggest. Instead of sitting there racking your brain going, what should I do? What should I do? What should I do? Get into the habit of whenever something just naturally comes to you, when something just occurs to you organically, write it the hell down. We all have smartphones nowadays. There's a note-taking feature in it. If you're on an iPhone, you can even say, hey, Siri, I want to take a note, and she'll take the note, and next thing you know, you have it stored. It's easy, simple to be able to keep these ideas stored once you come up with them, because that's how the good ideas come about. You see something that triggers something in your brain in a good way, and you write it down. And I think we should get in the habit of doing that. By the way, that's great if you want to do stand-up comedy too, because instead of sitting there saying, oh God, how do I write jokes? What can I write down that's funny? You just write down the things that occur to you as funny as they come along in life. And I think that's a great way to figure out naturally what you should be doing, because let's face it, Nick, if you're out doing what you're passionate about, if you're thinking about something other than your day job anyway, the chances are near 100% that you're going to come up with something that's a new idea that you haven't thought of before that could theoretically become a side hustle for you, especially if your brain is tuned in to think that way, right?
Yeah, there's this, mental gymnastics or mental, basically biceps curls that you can kind of train yourself to do as you go through the day and make yourself do this habit of writing down ideas. There's an exercise I call What Sucks, and it's basically for a day or a week or however long you want to do this, just write down everything that sucks about your day. And every one of those is probably a pain point that other people are dealing with too. There might be a business model on the other side of that.
Yeah, that's genius. That leads to the final question for this show, and it's a real good one. You ready? What would be the first step for a guy who's inspired by this episode to start a side hustle for himself?
Well, the first step is going to figure out why you want to do that. Because before you can even go down the rabbit hole of ideas and marketing and sales and hiring a team, like all the stuff that comes after registering your business, taxes, it's like the underlying motivation. Like, why do I want to do that? Is it to make an extra $1,000 a month? Great. why. What does that afford you? How does that make a difference to your bottom line? How does that shorten your cubicle lifespan? Like, what is the big motivating why behind it? Because if it's not big enough, you're going to quit in 3 months and you're going to say, I don't care. Like, life is pretty good. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I define success as having freedom over your calendar, having control over your calendar. And everybody would love to get to 24 hours in the day, but that's probably not realistic at the onset. It's not even realistic for me, even being self-employed. But you can start to carve out little pieces of time that do belong to you. Maybe it's 15 minutes here, maybe it's half an hour here. In those times, that's when you can kind of carve out the hours that you're going to need to do the research, to do the homework, to do the, like we said, the mental biceps curls, to really get something off the ground.
Yeah. And one thing I would add to all of that wonderful advice is some of the things we're not good at, I would almost dare say darn near everything we're not good at can be outsourced to someone who knows what they're doing and is trustworthy for far less money than you think, because they're good at that, not what you're good at. And the more you're able to do what you're uniquely capable of doing and let other people handle scary things like taxes and web development and graphic design, you're going to be amazed at how little you're going to be out of pocket for that and how much faster your business will grow. And I think that should be a point of encouragement for guys listening. Nick, what a great conversation. We could talk about this all day, I'm sure.
I love it.
Right now, I want to send guys to the Side Hustle where they can get your book on Amazon and also grab a listen to the Side Hustle show on iTunes. And to do that, go to mountaintoppodcast.com/hustle, HUSTLE. That's all you need. www.mountaintoppodcast.com/hustle, where you'll find out more about Nick and be able to grab a copy of his book. I'll also put a copy of his book on the Amazon influencer page for you guys, where you can also find other books by other hosts and start building up your library with 100% good, solid reading. Thank you so much again, Nick. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And guys, listen, I want you to go to mountaintoppodcast.com right now and look around. I've got new things there for you. You can check out our sponsors, including Keyport and Hero Soap that I talked about earlier. And you can check out not only the YouTube versions of these shows on the fly, you can also download transcripts. So if you missed a part of it or you kind of couldn't tell what we were saying, you can check up on that. You can also download free reports, such as the one that covers just about every sticking point you can think of in terms of how to get better with women. And I also have a brief ebook up there called Dealing with Breakups. It isn't how to be broken up with, but if you've got a woman in your life and you need to call it off, how do you do that with class and dignity and do it the right way so that nobody's damaged? As always, I also invite you to talk to me free for 25 minutes so we can put a plan of action together to take you from where you are right now to where you want to be. It's all there for you at mountaintoppodcast.com. Until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.